Doctors, what's the dumbest thing patients have lied about? Story 1. Do you smoke cigarettes? No, I quit. When did you quit? This morning. Story 2. This one guy repeatedly used to come in saying he hadn't shit in 7 days. This would usually necessitate a examination with a finger. That's why he kept saying it. The patient used to come in every time the new doctors rotated in, who wouldn't be wise to his tricks. In addition, one guy came in feigning unconsciousness, did not respond to even the most painful of stimuli. Some of these were pretty painful. We were talking amongst ourselves about intubating him. He then opened his eyes and said, "They did that last time. I didn't like it." Story 3. Not considering the psychiatric and the boring answers, like people who just swear with all their heart that they are taking their medications when they clearly aren't, which is the vast majority, there's not much really. Only one really unique comes to mind. It was a patient that was a really kind old man who always would talk a lot with us, telling stories, praising the beauty of everyone in a tender and respectable way, saying how really grateful for our work he was, and so on. Sad old man would always appear with really high blood pressure values, even though he would swear that he always used his medication correctly. And after we did so many changes with his medication in many different ways, it's only natural to think that there's some problem with how he's taking them, if he was doing it at all. However, one day, after noticing that he would always go to the bathroom before even reaching out to the receptionist, someone discovered he would always eat a load of pure salt before being seen by any of the doctors, trying to make his pressure intentionally go sky high. Later, we also obviously discovered that he indeed would not take his medications correctly as well, in order to obtain these results again and again. Turns out he suffered a lot from loneliness, and he was an old man that didn't have much contact with his family anymore, but mostly because his family didn't reach out to him almost at any given time, even though everyone lived close by. And in his desperation, sustaining dangerous high blood pressure was the best way he had to obtain human contact with the emergency every week. This was the odd one, but it's really common in general among elderly patients to appear lying about their symptoms, only trying to gather some attention in a private minute to speak about anything else. Most of the time, they book an appointment only to talk about recent trivialities, which makes them clearly better. Although by the end of the talk, it's also easy to see how they gathered back part of the sadness that the loneliness brings to them. Around my patients, at least, it's common for many to cry as they leave. Loneliness is a hell of both a simple and complex problem, and one that no one should be bound to live with. This one breaks my heart. Oh, that poor old man. Where I live, when an old person begins calling the police a lot, he/she gets assigned to a friendship program. Once a month, an officer on duty will visit for an hour or so, and can also be called for some household help. Story 4. It's not so much a patient lie as it is me being dumb, inexperienced, and uncomfortable asking necessary questions. I had a hypothetical patient during residency that was a very manly veteran, and I was admitting him for rectal bleeding. He was at the age where it was more than likely colon cancer, so I didn't think it was necessary to ask for a sexual history. Folks at this particular establishment were known to at times be homophobic, and I had been yelled at by patients previously for asking, "Do you have sex with men, women, or both?" It ate away at my conscience, though, so I went back and absurdly nervously and asked him. He answered, "Son, I'm as gay as a rainbow. I've been at the bathhouse for the last couple of nights, but I wasn't sure how it would go over to admit." That's when the bleeding started. Story 5. Their age. Had a woman. Says she's 30 when she clearly didn't look it. Oh well, I move on to another question. Look at her files and lab reports have her real age on them, 41. Like, why though? What difference does it make lying to healthcare staff? This is health related, not your Tinder profile. Nobody gonna see this and go, "I ain't dating an old lady." By the way, she was married with 4 children. Reply 1. When I was 30, I told people I was 40 just because they would tell me how great I looked. If you're gonna lie about your age, go up. Story 6. I had a lady tell me she had no idea how she got a rash she had on her face. I left the room, gave report to the MD, and when I walked back in with the doctor, she looked at me and said, "I didn't think you'd be coming back in the room," and then proceeded to confess that she'd been cheating on her husband and thought she had herpes. She didn't have it in the end. Story 7. My little brother was a nurse for about a decade. He has said many times that people stick anything up their butts, from light bulbs to hairbrushes to golf shoes. And at first, it's hilarious. Then after a year or so, it's not funny because you've seen way too many distended holes. Then after a decade or so, it starts to get funny again because you think you've seen everything. And then one day, a 45-year-old man is driven to the hospital by his wife, and he has a golf shoe up his ass. And he told his wife that he and the boys were golfing, and he slipped in the locker room, and it got rammed up there, completely disregarding the fact that the part of the shoe that's inside him is covered in Vaseline. Oh man, your brother's experiences as a nurse must be a wild ride. I can totally picture how these situations would start off as hilarious, but then lose their charm after seeing so many. And then, just when you think you've seen it all, someone comes in with the golf shoe of all things. I can't help but laugh at the creativity and sheer absurdity of it all. Story 8. One dude lied about being paralyzed after a lumbar puncture. Get a call from a nurse patient who says he can't move his legs following a lumbar puncture, spinal tap. I called the team that did the procedure and they assured me there was no indication of this sort of injury happening during the procedure, but agreed with my plan to get an urgent MRI. I go to examine him and the nurse says he thinks he moved one of his feet. Next thing I know, he says he can actually move his legs again, but they're feeling weird. Then this weird feeling turns into intense pain and he asks for intravenous painkillers. I tell him no because this story makes no sense. By God, it was a miracle. I tell you, when this man walked himself right out of the hospital after I refused to give him the meds. Also, the MRI was normal. Story 9. My girlfriend was in a mood with me and I thought I'd cheer her up by juggling knives. And then I accidentally stabbed myself in the thigh. This was said by a 19-year-old patient, and not a single person in the hospital believed this nonsense. Story 10. Not a doctor, but in patient care nonetheless. A guy comes in, between 17 to 19 years old, for pebble hits, which was pretty odd. He says he was doing yard work when the tool knocked a pebble into his He went to check it, and now it was making pus. The nurse clarified that he was wearing pants. He denies sexual history and stands by that he got hit on his by a rock through his pants, which made him produce pus. However, the medical results discovered that he had chlamydia. Story 11. I fell on it in the shower. Story 12. Had a patient show up in the ER with a wound to the back of her head. I say, "Hey, Miss X, what happened?" "I don't know. I picked up chicken from the gas station and went to bed, and this morning I noticed I was bleeding." I start inspecting the wound. Looks like it tracks pretty far, and there's this strange cotton-like material sticking out that is also tracking too deep to visualize. I press her for some more about the circumstances because my ER dog spider sense starts going off. Me. Were you assaulted? Did someone harm you? Were you in a car accident? Did something fall on you? Patient. No, I just went to bed. Maybe I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Finally, I decide to send her through the donut of truth, aka get a CT scan of her head before me and my trusty scalpel start seeing where this trail of mystery cotton leads. The lady had a bullet lodged up against her skull bone. Still don't have an answer to the cotton, but I'm guessing the gun fired through some cloth. When I told her she had a bullet in her head, her response was, "Oh, weird." And then she went back to playing Candy Crush on her phone. Story 13. Sorta the opposite, but I have an ankle that I've sprained quite badly twice. After years of PT, I managed to rehab it back to full strength, but I never recovered to the full range of motion. It's close. Years later, I was playing football in the snow with a bunch of teenagers, and one of them tackled me, and I went the other way, opposite of the prior sprains, and broke. I hobbled back to the cabin and went to the ER the next morning. They referred me to a specialist a week later. I gave this guy dates and times for the previous injuries and the one I had at the time. I was as specific as possible, and he went all Dr. House on me, told me he didn't have time to be lied to, and stormed out. It was weird. I got in to see another specialist and gave him my history. He helped me build it back, and after another year of PT, it's as strong as it ever was, still about 90% range of motion. I never understood why that first doc was so sure I was lying. I imagine it was because of the buildup of scar tissue and bone. Even now it's visibly larger than my other ankle. Reply 1. I brought a good friend to the ER one night because he was in extreme pain from kidney stones. Like a grown man bawling from the pain. Stayed with him in the ER, and the doctor walks in, looked at my buddy, and tells him he will not give him any painkillers. This is before even examining him. Granted, my buddy is covered in tattoos and has long hair and was in his work clothes. He is a metal fabricator, so his clothes are always dirty. I went off on that doctor. I get they must see that a lot, but at least examine the man before making a judgment like that. Story 14. Not me, but my mom used to literally tell my doctors I'm lying about my headache. They'd believe her because I was a child and I never really showed my pain. No screaming/crying, just quietly explaining that it hurts. When I was 16, we had to go get me to the ER because what started as another headache slowly turned into me passing out randomly and losing the memory of entire weeks over the course of a few months. I wasn't in fact lying. I was and still am, but now I'm treated, suffering from a chronic illness that could have me if it went undiagnosed and untreated. Reply 1. What did she say after that? Reply 2. Pretty much nothing. I left home for a boarding school when I was 15. She was only there because the school demanded it. We went low contact back then. We talk now, but she just doesn't really acknowledge these things. She's apologized a few times for other stuff, but we just don't really talk about it anymore. Story 15. A guy got and came into out trauma bay drunk/high around 2 a.m. with something like $5,000 in cash. And he told everyone he was on his way to donate it to a drop box at a local charity. Story 16. When I was a peds nurse, I had a super trashy lady come in with a 2-year-old. She said the baby wasn't eating or drinking anything. We admit the baby and legitimately start getting concerned because the food trays are untouched, no wet diapers, no drinking her juice, etc. Weight is staying the same though. The pediatrician asked me to sit outside the room and watch through a cracked window shade that looked into the room. So I watch, and this mother is shoving pizza and soda down this baby's throat, but the baby obviously has no interest in the mashed potatoes/chicken on her tray because she's stuffed with junk food. The mom would change the diaper and hide it instead of leaving it to be weighed. It was so bizarre, and she completely denied doing it even though I saw her. Poor baby. What bugs me in this entire story is this. What was the reasoning for the baby being brought in if the mom was just going to do that? Like, what was her endgame here? Story 17. Nurse here. The absolute dumbest thing patients have said, and to be fair, this was the patient's parents since I was in pediatric, but still dumb and caused no end to grief trying to unspin it. I was rooming patients and I went to the full lobby and called the next one in by last name. They stand up and mom and dad bring the little girl back. I'm rooming them, taking the vitals, reviewing the purpose of the visit, making some adjustments to the chart, updating their pharmacy and allergies, and going out and letting the pediatrician know they are ready. The pediatrician goes into the room and 3 minutes later and says, "That's not my patient. Where is my patient?" I'm like, what the hell? I go in and ask the parents, and no, in fact, they were not the patient. I'm like, why did you say you were someone you weren't? They only said they didn't want to wait, so they just came back. We had to completely unspin all the changes to that chart and had to get legal involved to make sure there was no HIPAA violations, which fortunately there weren't. I'm fascinated that people can collectively think, yeah, let's do this, no one will know. Like, how does that even play out in their minds? Story 18. Had a friend who is an EMT driver tell me about a call she responded to where the guy was barely coherent or audible in his 911 call, but managed to get 2 pieces of information out perfectly: his address and the word stomach. When they arrived, the man was covered in a blanket, sweating profusely, though he looked like he hadn't moved in days. My friend said that she immediately observed that even with early signs of his skin showing jaundice symptoms, his cheeks remained rosy red, and he avoided eye contact and answering any questions. The only words he would speak between groans were poison and stomach. My friend took a quick look around to see if there were any chemical bottles out, but didn't see anything. Just as she was returning to the ambulance, she noticed that there was a large pot on the stove that had a low flame on it. She turned the range off and removed the lid of the pot, and was startled to see a dozen naked Barbie dolls, all of which had their heads removed. When she informed the man that she had turned off the range, he became erratic and aggressive until he was dropped off at the ER. Later in the day, she ran into a friend that worked in radiology who told her that the entire time the man only answered the word poison as to what he ingested. When they told him that they would need to x-ray him, his demeanor completely changed. Calmer, communicated clearer, but accepting that the truth was around the corner. X-ray results showed that he had ingested 18 Barbie doll heads and were locked up in his stomach for nearly 2 weeks. He explained that he sterilized the Barbies in hot water and that they were the newer plastic because the older material was caustic to internal organs. The surgeon apparently ended his conversation by asking him why he would ingest the Barbie doll heads. And the man replied, "Because I like the way it feels when I get them out."
Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.